Welcome everyone once again to the Cthulhu Mythos 214 Theoretical Cthulhu Mythos questions. In this in this little bit we will be discussing what if Cthulhu is not Cthulhu. And that's more of a general broad question about what if the writers or the characters in the HP Lovecraft stories and the Robert E. Howard stories in modern times, or actually not that quite so much. Frank Belknap long characters, or like the more modern for their time Cthulhu mythos stories. What if the narrators were getting it wrong? What if they're misunderstanding ancient tomes, ancient tablets? What if they are themselves unreliable narrators who have been influenced by something greater and larger outside of themselves? I am your guest speaker, DB Spitzer, host of People's Guide to the Cthulhu Mythos, here to talk about what if Cthulhu isn't Cthulhu, or what if the Cthulhu Mythos doesn't work like we think it does. Some people think of it as like a hierarchy where Azathoth is the highest, and then there's the other outer gods, and somewhere in there is the elder gods, and down below that are the great old ones, and then there's the rest of us. But what if it's something else? What if, and this is a lot of what ifs, what if, first one, what if Cthulhu isn't Cthulhu? What if Cthulhu has been a massive misinterpretation and is kind of a security system for, like, I don't know, the elder things, or maybe even deep ones, something to scare people off from going into the entrance for their city, for people who would come in from land, but it's like, they're super exit out. And that's one way a steamboat could go through a fourth dimensional hologram of some sort, something we couldn't even begin to understand. And one reason why yay isn't quite solid is some things aren't quite solid. I'm not saying everything's a 3D projection. I'm not saying Wilbur Whateley's brother was a 3D projection. I am saying that's the influence of an outer god coming anywhere near us. Somehow we'll get into that. We'll get into that. So, so that's Cthulhu. That's an idea for Cthulhu. What if Cthulhu's not Cthulhu, and just a giant semi-sentient delivery device of a warning device, a security device. It's a biological holographic security device that's transfixed that area and has the ability to send out stuff. But what it's sending out is a warning, but it's not a warning meant for our human brains. It's a warning to some long dead species. Maybe it's a warning to the elder things. Maybe it's a warning to, I don't know, Yithians. Don't come to this time period. Cthulhu's here, and maybe it's scare away Yithians or the Migo or something else. You've got ideas. I'd love to hear them. What if Azathoth isn't just some giant creature? What if Azathoth is so big we don't understand how big Azathoth is? What if the known universe as we know it, or like possibly even just our galaxy, is Azathoth's shadow? This is something I've talked about in poetry before, about there being a creature that's so large and multidimensional. The shadow, or one of the shadows it casts, is our universe, or our galaxy. Thinking about this in the way that a three-dimensional object casts a two-dimensional shadow. Fourth-dimensional object casts a three-dimensional shadow, etc. Our galaxy is Azathoth's shadow. What if there were some things that ought not be? Not because the fact that in the universe they're not supposed to be there, but the reason they're stuck there is they're not supposed to be there. They're supposed to be in multi-dimensional space. When you take something that's like 12th dimensional and put it into something that's 7th dimensional, it's limited. It's not like it's not like it can move freely or better or anything. It's just kind of trapped and limited in its shape and its space and its time. Maybe multidimensional creatures are talking about a secondary point in space-time that they're transfixed to while also working around in other things. I don't know. Just an idea. But say a lot of these great old ones are just the biggest and the oldest variant of their species. That's something that's been kicked around a lot, but say also maybe they are more of an idea of a species for like multi-dimensional. I don't know. There's things to think about. I do like the idea of Shoggoths being three-dimensional creatures. They're just very ancient biomechanoids, but things like the Bayaki are multi-dimensional creatures that are able to fly through space, and maybe the Elder Things were once multidimensional creatures, but as they spent more time on Earth, they became three-dimensional creatures. As their generations went on, it became easier for them to be three-dimensional creatures, and they lost the ability to fly through space. So, that's one of the kind of things I want to talk about with this. Other things I want to talk about is if we're treating HP Lovecraft's writings as like the original source for a lot of this, it feels like there's so many uncredible sources, or like there's something else going on that they're trying to cover up, um, and it just feels like, I don't know, maybe a lot of people not understanding what they're witnessing. I mean, Keziah Mason may have been able to figure out where the angles of time and space were to find extra-dimensional space, but she understood the Cthulhu mythos as well as anyone who's willing to profit off of a witch one way or the other is able to, you know, teach her or explain it to her. I mean, she understood it a little bit better than most of us, but probably didn't have a very, very clear idea how it actually worked or what it was onto what scale. I mean, you can see things, but to actually see them at a scope and scale that makes sense, something especially like great old ones even, let alone eldritch gods, it's you can trust in something or someone that can't even describe all of itself. I don't know. It's a little tricky. And if you have Nyarlathotep out there, Nyarlathotep, if I need to remind people, is quote unquote the messenger of Azathoth. Nyarlathotep could simply just be a charlatan who's claiming to be an avatar of Azathoth. And people could just be saying, "Oh, that's Nyarlathotep, that terrible creature that came, that people used to worship. That's Nyarlathotep," and it's people attribute it could be like not necessarily evil for evil's sake. It could be like some sort of like Azathothian strain that creates creatures that are somehow thought of or related to Azathoth, as you know, people using some old Egyptian term that kind of sounds like Nyarlathotep, and then that's what it becomes, or whatever. But like some sort of like ancient cosmic strain that occasionally leaks in and causes bizarre mutations and bizarre creatures that somehow I don't know, awaken the collective unconscious or the cosmic unseen and freaks people out or makes people draw pictures of it or something of that nature. And speaking of like Azathothian strain, could be the same type of thing that you find in Clark Ashton Smith stories where you have Vormi, which could clearly be Neanderthals, Vormi, uh, who crossbred with Sathagwa's bloodline, which is definitely Azathothian, and create something that like a human hunter or a humanoid hunter that no matter what they did to it, no matter how bad they smashed it or chopped its head off, it would just turn into this like black goo and then wreak havoc. It was so terrible, they had to leave the city. And like, hundreds of years later, master thieves go in to try and check it out and come out missing limbs. So, I mean, as a Thothian strain, and there's things that like people call Azathoth, not yeah, Azathothian strain. People call Azathoth that I think that just means like Azathothian and strain, like kind of like a gooey, weird thing. And the nuclear chaos, it being, this is something a lot of writers and editors have talked about, that when Azathoth is described as the nuclear chaos, we're not talking nuclear as in nuclear fission or anything like that. We're talking like nucleus, the center of. This is kind of like the central god of the Cthulhu mythos is Azathoth. So, let's go. All right, so we have Cthulhu as the one that everyone thinks of because of the story The Call of Cthulhu, and probably the easiest thing for humans to recognize out of this mythology, out of this things that have happened with the last several thousands of years that the Cthulhu mythos and humanity have intersected. Uh, Times that humanity and the Cthulhu mythos have intersected, there's not a lot of witnesses, and you have like whole areas becoming desert. You have cities sinking, not just Atlantis, but the parts that are now known as Doggerland, and like various parts uh, for like pre-human civilizations, places where the Conan hung out, and Cole, and all the Robert E. Howard characters, and also you also had all of the Clark Ashton Smith characters worshiping their gods, some of which continued to live on in Lovecraft's time, or those names were used. Those names were recorded in tablets. Those names were recorded on cave walls. Those pictures were drawn. Things were made, and we don't know. There's such a difference in time that a bad narrator 1,000 years ago still a bad narrator. If someone's calling something Sathagwa, but they just mean that it's an Azathothian strain because people haven't learned what that word is in archaeology or whatever. I don't know how this stuff works. I'm 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 uh I'm a podcaster and an amateur game designer and writer, not an archaeologist. So we got this going on. Oh, certainly not a geneticist. And yeah, so say you have aliens that come out of the Vermont hills. They're lobstrosities that are fungal in nature. Um, are they, and some literature has them as not remembering who they are or where they're from. What what if they're Yithians? What if they are some sort of bio race that the Elder Things created, much like much like Shoggoths, but they're from a different part of time-space. Or they were something that was built for another planet for a different reason, and then the Elder Things left that place, and those, you know, continued on with the Elder Things religion, which probably Azathoth. And because people are like, who do the Deep Ones worship? Well, they worship Dagon and Hydra, who worship Cthulhu, who worship Azathoth. So, there's it all seems like it goes to Azathoth. Even the Shan, the insects from Shagai, they worship Azathoth. A lot of people worship Azathoth, and it's more like humanoids are the ones who are going after uh, Yog Sothoth and Shub-Niggurath and her goat in the woods with 1,000 young. And we don't have any like direct stories about a lot of this elder god stuff. We have like second-hand descriptions of, a kid of one uh, interacting with some professors and the locals telling what happened. We also have a 15-year-old, supposedly a 15-year-old who left a note in an abandoned house talking about stuff that is different sounding from Shoggoths, what other people talk about Shoggoths. It's kind of like some certain inconsistencies, and I just think like a lot of these things could be like just at some point in time just generic names for different biomechanical creatures. Um, the elder things they disappeared, and some of them got reawoken a long time later and freaked out because some of them were killed, and everything was in ruins and disarray. But hey, that's the way it goes in the Cthulhu mythos. It doesn't matter if you're an ancient scientist or a modern day scientist adventurer. I mean, it's grim stuff. A lot of the great old ones, I mean, they could just be like variations of like people a lot of times will be like, oh, great old ones are like the worst, like the apex predator of uh that creature, or they're like the most powerful version of that creature. And it's like, what if they're not the most powerful version of that creature? They're just that creature that has an Azathothian strain. You could have whole cultures or civilizations where people have an Azathothian strain going through it, where they are kind of like the conquerors or the people who do things that would generally mean that they're like above not other people, but like have knowledge that like is given to them, or practices that are given to them by uh, great old ones, like alien practices, like terrible, weird, bizarre practices, chants, and things like that that they interpret just from, I guess, looking at great old ones, or like having stuff passed down in oral tradition, or in ancient tomes like the Necronomicon or the Cult of Ghoul, or uh, there's so many books in the Cthulhu mythos. The Necronomicon is the one that most people know, and depending on who writes it, what's in it is kind of up in the air. And it's not like a recipe book, but it's also not an encyclopedia. It's a prayer book, but it's also has like maybe observations. It's the diary of a philosopher. It may have like astronomical charts and chemical charts and just like different things, but it's not going to be organized how you would think. And it's like if you're going to find any heretical stuff, um, I mean, like what would be considered heretical in the Cthulhu mythos? I mean, I'm not talking about like, oh yes, Cthulhu lives in the dirt. I'm talking about like Cthulhu's not real. and a bunch of other things that you think of as great old ones aren't like security devices. They're just like ancient versions of creatures that have an Azathothian strain to them. Somehow came in contact with great old ones, and it somehow changed things. Just like Wilbur Whately and his brother, they were purposely touched somehow by Yog-Sothoth. And did I talk about what if the elder things are just different ways that people have visually seen or given names to a multi-dimensional creature like Azathoth? Like, there is no Yog-Sothoth, there is no Shub-Niggurath, there is no Quasaquhag. I'm trying to remember. Sathagwa's great grandpa, Azathoth's son or child that is like not quite solid. Anyway, what if those are all aspects, all notions of Azathoth that are very much. Hold on one moment. Water brought to you by water. What if they're all aspects of Azathoth, but just like seeing it from different angles, seeing it from different dimensions and such? Like if you have something that can move its dimensions, or something that's so big, like if you see it here, you're seeing a totally different thing from when you see it over there. It's less like, talking to a mountain and more like looking at constellations while, we're spinning around a sun. We have day and light and everything like that. But it's like that, but like multi-dimensional. And maybe throw some time in. I mean, if people got Azathoth and Yog-Sothoth and everyone else confused, I wouldn't blame them. I mean, that seems reasonable. That seems completely reasonable. And it also seems completely reasonable if people thought that, I don't know, Sethagwa, who may have been some hyper intelligent pre humanoid life form and just kind of like the one that had like the most terrestrial connection to Azathoth, or someone who had been around long enough, or maybe like Sethagwa was like Pliny the Elder or something, someone who's like collected a bunch of ancient literature. Doesn't matter if it's good or bad, and is also kind of like a massive space monster. Um, Pretty good if you're another space monster. Pretty bad if you're just some three-dimensional creature who wants to know about something that would make no sense to them. I mean, hey, that's what you get when you mess with the Sathagwa. Anyway, but yeah, I feel like if you go down through great old ones, you can be like, oh, okay, yeah, hey, sure, yeah, you could treat it like that. Um, is it a little bit boring, some of that? Yeah, sure. And you just like, just like swat elder gods just like out of there and be like, or the, yeah, elder gods, you'd be like, psh, no, don't, they're not really even there. That's more like myth. And you can even treat some great old ones or even outer gods as just complete myth and be like, no, 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 that stuff's all myth. This stuff is real. This stuff is real. And it's like, you thought it was this. It's even more crazier. It's this. It's like, all science is based off this stuff. And it's like, oh, okay, okay. You know, Throw the Cthulhu mythos on its ear. This goes for writing. This goes for game designing. This goes for poetry. This goes for art projects. What if Cthulhu isn't Cthulhu? All right. Thank you so much. If you have any questions, you can reach me at pgttcm.com. That's P for poop, G for grandpa, T for teacup, T for top of the morning to you. Uh, where was I? PGTT. C for come on back now, you hear? And M is for Monster Mash. because I can't think of anything again. So yeah, PGTTCM, People's Guide to the Cthulhu Mythos.com, PGTTCM at gmail.com is how you can ask questions, get on the show, get your books reviewed, be a guest, talk about your movie, anything you want to do. Let us know. And thanks again for everyone for listening to this, and hope you're having a good time, and have a good day. Or a spooky evening. I didn't use my spooky voice this time, and also, I didn't put any notes up because someone messed with my notes the last time and made it look like I had a typo. So, you're going to have to take your own notes, everyone. And if you see me, I may have a copy of the quiz for you. So, all right. So, study up, and we'll see you next time.